The world won't understand you. Hey, but it's okay. Said the world won't understand you, 'cause I made you in my own way. Said the world won't understand you.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 21 of InAGoodWay podcast. My special guest, which is a guest that's already been on here before, is Debbie Gleason. Hello, Debbie. Thank you for and welcome back. Welcome back. So today, Debbie is gonna be kind enough to talk or have this conversation with me about mental health, since October is Mental Health Awareness Month. I'm not sure what because I know there was another month that's also like mental health, or a week or something, right? Or
I think there's a few different ones. So there's like a social work month, there's a mental health awareness, and then there's also the suicide awareness as well. So there's a lot of overlapping.
Okay. Yeah, so today, I mean, this month, since it's mental health awareness, yeah, I wanted you to talk about it more from I guess therapist standpoint, like you don't have to share information of like what you do with your clients and all that, because I know you're not supposed to, right? But just like maybe kind of how you're trained to deal with it, and like what kind of things they prepare you for, and I mean, I'm sure there's a lot to go with it, so obviously you could speak about it a lot better than I can, so I would love to hear your take on like all that.
I think on a basic level, I mean, we all have these different things like anxiety and depression, and we all deal with everyday stressors. What I explain to people, because when people come in and they're like, oh, I was diagnosed with anxiety, or I was diagnosed with depression, and they kind of take it as this like sentence almost of like, well, what now? And I just tell them basically, we all have that. It's just, to me, and I don't know, maybe somebody else would disagree with this, but to me, what the difference between actually being diagnosed and someone who, I'm not formally diagnosed with anything right now. That's not to say that I haven't been, but I think what changes that is when you have an inability to cope. So, I could be given really bad news today and start crying and maybe not know when I'll stop crying, but an experience like grief or sadness for like a whole week or something, depending on the extent to what happened. But, somebody else who has depression experiences this in like cycles and different things, or has different triggers, or maybe even because they have the diagnosis, they assume that role, but to me, again, it's just when you have that lack of coping, you don't know what to do with that emotion. That's when you have a label, that's something that I believe. And I also had a conversation recently with a patient about if you can actually like move out of that diagnosis. So I thought that was really interesting. So like I just said, I have actually been diagnosed with different things in the past. I don't consider myself to have those anymore. I've either worked through them, or I've figured out coping skills, or maybe hormones or different things changed. You never know. But I do think that a diagnosis is not something lifelong, or it doesn't have to be.
See, and you never, or at least me, okay, so I won't say maybe it has been out there, but at least for myself, I don't recall hearing like yeah, you can get through it and then it goes away. See, usually I hear that it's kind of makes it sound like it's a lifelong thing. So were you trained in that way to like is that something you learned on
like
your
I
own?
said, this is my personal thing, and I think too because I have experienced coming out of those things, and so to me, I have witnessed myself not having that. I have also had patients who I've had to tell them, I don't see those symptoms in you anymore. And they weren't even aware of it. They still considered themselves depressed, or they still just considered themselves to have anxiety. But then I had to tell them like fact, or like scientifically based. I was like, you haven't had these symptoms in this much time. You haven't had a panic attack in this amount of time. You don't have the criteria. You don't meet it from the textbook. You don't meet that diagnosis anymore. So like I've had to explain it to them. They weren't even aware of it. They weren't like, oh, well, I don't have it anymore. They acknowledged feeling better, but they still considered themselves to have that diagnosis.
Oh, wow. And so in that case, do they, has it ever been told to you like, oh, wow, the therapist I had before told me I was, and so how do you deal with that? How do you go against, like, is it bad to do that, to go against another therapist diagnosis? Like, is, like,
I
what
don't
happens in those situations?
I don't necessarily think so. I think it would be different if maybe somebody told me about a therapist in the same clinic that I'm in
Oh,
and
okay.
maybe gave me the name. So maybe I would be hesitant as to what I would say or be more reserved about it so that
Mhm.
nothing would get mixed or crossed of like, well, she said this and she said that, and who's right or what. Yeah, I wouldn't want to start any drama or anything like that or say that somebody was wrong. But I do, if I know that they're coming from a different hospital or a different clinic or they've seen somebody that I don't know, I would give them kind of what I say is I'll give them my impression. My impression is this.
Mm.
And so again, and I'll tell them too, maybe at that time you were presenting differently, but this is how you're presenting to me. This is how I've seen you.
And why do you think there is, I mean, it seems like there's a culture of almost that, like, having someone feel like it's a lifelong thing. I mean, that's just my observation. I could be 100% wrong, but that,
No.
as opposed to giving someone that hope that, hey, this could go away and you don't have to deal with it and you won't have to be on pills, you won't have to do none of this.
Mhm.
So, like, I guess that's more my thing, because obviously if you're with a therapist that's just keeping you in the same routine, and
Right.
then someone all of a sudden goes, like, for example, you that you see that, okay, you don't have the symptoms anymore, why, like, you're
Mhm.
better, but maybe
Mhm.
they don't even want to believe it because they've already been programmed to
Yeah, I see
think.
that a lot too. I see that a lot actually, and I try to as like kindly nudge them to seeing that. Especially so for example, now this is a little different, but someone with dementia, I don't know if you know what dementia
Yeah,
is. It's
yeah.
like the memory, and different things. Sometimes they have different um perceptions of what's going on too, so they might be a little like delusional or something, but it's all just memory and cognition impairment. But somebody with that, when they get that information, they learn that they have that. I have a lot of patients really freak out. They think it's the end. Why go on if their memory is failing them?
Mm.
But I forgot where I was going with that. I don't know why. But I think,
About the getting better or
oh,
something.
right. So once they hear that they have dementia, now I've definitely seen them start taking on that.
Mm.
But we're all forgetful. So you have to reinforce the other parts. Like, well, what is going well? So you forgot where you put your keys. I forget where I put my keys.
Yeah, all
Oh,
the
I
time.
don't have dementia. You
Yeah.
forgot what you were thinking. I literally just forgot why I
Yeah.
brought up dementia.
Yeah.
So again, I think just really trying to make things relatable, I guess, so that people can empower themselves, but then also recognize when they do feel like something's off. Because this isn't to say that there isn't anything wrong, but I think still kind of giving them that boost when they need it.
Yeah. No, and it even like with medical advice, right? Like sometimes, like,
Mhm.
my first interview was with my friend. I think we talked about it in that interview. I could be mistaken, but we
Yeah.
talked about how she had stage 4 cancer, right? They told her
Yeah.
basically that's it, she's terminal. And she got help. It was more natural, right? Natural remedies and all that, and she got better. She walked out of the hospital. The doctor couldn't believe it. But I mean, even that, right? Like, it shows that one person isn't always right. It's okay to get different opinions.
Oh,
um
definitely. Mhm.
I mean, this is obviously it's something completely different, but it kind of made me think about this because the other day, someone's car battery went dead, so I had to give them a ride, and I took them to, I don't know if you guys have O'Reilly's over there.
Yeah.
Oh,
Uh-huh.
okay, O'Reilly's. And you have
Yeah.
AutoZone or no?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Both of those theme songs just like came in my head now. But yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah, no. So I took them to O'Reilly's
Mhm.
and they tested the battery. They're like, "Oh no, it's dead. Yeah, there's no point in charging it. You're gonna have to buy another one." Like, all
Wow.
right, cool. I was like, "Yeah, we'll go to AutoZone." I was like, and then so we went, and then they charged it, and then they said the battery was perfect. So already right there, they would have
Hmm.
spent 100 and something or
Yeah.
$200 on a new battery.
Yeah.
But I had been through that already. I was like, nah, they did the exact same thing to me. I went to O'Reilly. They were like, your
Yeah.
battery's bad. And then I went to AutoZone. They actually took the time to charge it, tested it, and it was
Wow.
good.
Yeah.
So see, just from experience, I was able, save that per like,
Yeah.
$200 or something. So, I mean, obviously it's way different than, medical diagnosis and this and that,
Still, yeah.
but it reminded me of that. You said something. See, I forgot already. I should have made a note. Well, right in the beginning, you were talking about something, and I completely forgot already. You know, um, but go ahead.
I was just going to mention one thing to kind of go back. I did want to say this. So when talking about being able to come out of a diagnosis
Mhm.
or not have that or meet the description for it anymore, um, yeah, I was having this discussion with a patient actually just a couple weeks ago about it because she didn't know if that was possible. And when I was talking with her, I kept saying like you had whatever whatever, and
Mm,
she pointed out she's like had, and I was like yeah you had it. And she was like, well, what about now? And it like really, and I was like, I don't want to like confuse you. I don't want to, but this is what I'm seeing. And so I used that word impression of like, this is my impression. This is what I'm seeing. And I like gave her a lot of like the evidence, but I also told her it was like really about her. Like it is her experience. I can see something totally different than her, but she's
mm,
also the one living it and feeling it.
mm,
I was like, so you're gonna like, but what based on what you're telling me, this is what I'm seeing, but I had mentioned it because I had a close family member. I'm not going to say what relation in case they don't want me telling the story, but growing up, I had a close family member and she was going to therapy. She went to therapy for a long time. She might still be going to therapy. I don't know. But I remember, told me this was when I was studying for my master's in social work. She had told me that her therapist told her that she would always have her symptoms. Like,
mm.
I won't say what diagnosis, but that she would always have it. And I just remember I got so enraged by it. And I like looking back on it, like I can see why, because I see something totally different. But back then I just thought that that was just like a hope crusher. I was like, well, why even come to therapy? Why take medication? Why do any work if that's it? You know?
Yeah.
Uh, so I think that's also probably why I take that perspective with my patients, because otherwise, why would you even come?
Mm,
Why even be there? Why do I even have a job?
yeah. Yeah.
Like,
And see, I don't want to jump too ahead, but like, obviously I also wanted to talk about this because I dealt with that, right?
yeah.
I feel it's way more open now. Like when I was
Mhm.
growing up, I mean, it wasn't open at all, right? To the
Yeah.
point where even that every time I try to talk about it, like I think, see, that's why I guess in the culture I was growing up, and not just being Mexican, but I'm saying like in general, like the culture was like people didn't really talk about it. To the point
Right.
of even when I started, see, that's why I wanted to let you talk about like first, like what people could relate to before I
Mhm.
jump into the spiritual. Because for me,
Right. Mhm.
obviously there was a spiritual aspect that was going on that I was trying to figure out. Because I
Mhm.
started noticing patterns that I was starting to feel all this stuff and this and that, to
Yeah.
where even once when I opened up to my brother, I was probably still a teenager, 18, 19. I was like, yeah, I don't understand. Like something's wrong with me, something. And
Yeah.
no, and
Uh,
he couldn't understand it to a point where he was like, well, what happened? Like, were you molested as a kid or what? I was like, what? Like, that's what his brain went to. Like, I must have been molested to be like
Mhm.
messed up or something. And it's not to at all, because I know people really go through that, and that would cause
Yeah.
a bunch of like, maybe it doesn't show up immediately, and then next thing you know,
Right.
you're 20 something and it all comes back. So
Right.
so I
Mhm.
understand all that, but he even made me stop, like, oh, I don't remember, like
Yeah.
I hope not. I hope
Yeah.
when I was like, a bait or something, but I could say with certainty no, but he even made me pause, like Like, what the
Mhm.
hell? But
Yeah.
you know, so to me, I dealt with it head on, but I think like there's nothing wrong with it for me. For me, it's actually like, wow, that's nice. Like you could have, because sometimes I think too, like having someone to talk to, see like that. What do you think it did to me? It makes you want to close up. Like even
Mhm.
when I mentioned something to my mom or something, it's like, oh, well, why? Like you got this, you got that. Why would you feel anything? Like so boom, right. Like my what do you call it? Well, my first encounter with dealing with that was that if you tell people, they shut it down real quick, right? Like it's
Mm.
like there's no reason. So you learn not to talk about it. That was the culture I grew up in, right?
Yeah.
So
I
you
think a
know,
lot of people had that growing up, even just with your parents, like, just they're like, why, you have all these things, you're not homeless, come on, And so
yeah,
it's like, oh,
exactly.
okay. But it belittles your feelings then. It's like, but I mean, it's okay to feel that way, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I even found like I even wrote it like as a teenager. I was already see that's what helped me cope. I guess I even wrote it in a song, like
Hmm.
and I'm like, oh wow. So I was trying to express, but even in that song, I'm like explaining. So see, that's why to me, like my introduction into like what now they call mental health is like it's just things that went wrong and you didn't deal
Hmm.
with them or something, or you couldn't deal with them, and
Hmm.
they accumulate over time and then it hits you
Right.
later.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I had to figure it out because even in these songs, I'm saying pretty much what's wrong. I didn't get it till later.
Hmm.
Like I had this once, I'll say it real quick. I don't want to turn this into a whole like,
It's
but
okay.
yeah, but this is like from when I was a teenager and I go like, so tell me, Lord, am I wrong for these suicidal thoughts that keep carrying on? It seems the harder I try, the more they want to oppress me. Ain't nothing hurt quite like when family they turn against you. Who think
Mm.
that water will be thicker than blood, but I let your word be the only book could judge. I put all faith in you, but please forgive me. And my soul feels empty. Something like that. Like it was like, so it was like, okay, I'm saying it. See, so something that was going on with family, with this, that feeling like, I guess oppressed even as a teenager, like feeling like, I guess that you're not valued, you're not that. So even that to write as a teenager blows my mind that I was
Yeah.
able to express that. You know what I mean? So
Mhm.
I think that helped me cope with it. But now I don't want to like, oh, go ahead, go ahead.
No, I said definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Go ahead.
So I think that helped me express myself, and I had to kind of become my own therapist. And I think like
Mhm.
music helped, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't until like I think, I mean, years later, now it's more acceptable. Right now, I don't think I speak to anyone that doesn't go to therapy. You know what
Yeah.
I mean?
Yeah.
So now it's good. So that's why I would never like when someone says, "Oh, I go to therapy," or I want to go see a therapist. Like I'm always for it. Like that. I think that's great, right?
Yeah.
Um, as far as like, how often do you see or deal with like suicide, or do they like is that part of also like patients you deal with, or or suicide, is it something that like there's certain therapists that deal more with that, or
I think I mean I don't think we can like pick and choose on that level.
Mhm.
But I think all of us see patients that are suicidal, So I mean somebody could have that and only have those kinds of thoughts and not really have a diagnosis. And some people might have depression, which causes the suicidal thoughts,
Mm.
or even anxiety that causes the suicidal thoughts. So with anxiety, there's also like the OCD, which is like repetitive behaviors or looping thoughts. And the behaviors are usually because of a thought. So it's like, oh, I have to, turn the doorknob 5 times before I open it, because if I don't do that, the house will catch on fire.
Oh, wow.
So it's
I
like
mean,
it's
I'm
a
sorry to
thought.
laugh. Yeah. I don't
Right,
mean to laugh,
yeah. I
but
mean, it's
yeah,
it's
wow.
not logical, and a lot of those people who have it, they know it. They know it makes no sense necessarily, but it's something in them. It's like a belief or it's their belief that I tell them that it's your belief, but you can change your belief.
Wow.
Um, so it's a belief that they have. If I don't do this, something bad will happen.
Mm.
So that's why they do it. Yeah.
And so, like, I know I was reading the statistics from 2020. I think 2020. See, because even when I was going through that, I
Hmm.
wanted to understand myself, right? Like, even that, I went through like, after my brother told me that, like, he was like asking if I had got molested or whatever.
Gosh, yeah.
And I went on my whole journey. I made sure I didn't drink, I didn't smoke nothing, I didn't drink coffee, because I was already working warehouse jobs, like, you know, drinking caffeine or whatever. So I went on a whole like cleanse, right, to make
Yeah.
sure I could figure it out. And you know, what was crazy was, you know, since I was already working a messed up schedule, like with those warehouse jobs, I think I was up one night and they always had infomercials at that time. And so there was an infomercial about like, because I didn't want to take pills, you know, to my understanding, I didn't want to go and be on pills or nothing like that. They had a video, and I mean, an infomercial, and there was this lady, and I think it was a lady from Terminator. I don't know, her, you know, the Sarah Connor lady. I don't know her. I think Linda Hamilton or Linda something. I think is, I don't know if you know who she is. You never watched Terminator?
No,
No?
no, I'll have to check it out. But yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah, yeah. No, so, well, you know, she's all hardcore. She's the one that she's pretty much like the hero.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So her, Linda, I think it's Hamill, I don't know, but I think she was on that infomercial too, that, you know, she didn't want to be like taking pills or none of that. And so they had all these tapes. And so I was like, you know what, screw it, I'm gonna try it. So I called them, but it was like hundreds of dollars, I think. And I was like, well, I don't have the money, or I'll call, or I was like, oh, I'll call back or something. But then I think they called me. I guess I had left them my number or something, and they called me and they're like, we're gonna send you the tapes for free. So I was like, yeah, yeah. So I was like, oh wow, like these people are like, they legit care, like they're trying to help people, like. And I remember I got there and it was like 30 cassettes, right? I wish I still had because all I did was listen to the first cassette, and that's all I needed, and then I was good. Like,
wow.
Yeah. So I wish I could remember what was on that cassette, but it was for me, right? Whatever I was going through, that was just enough for me. You know, obviously there's all these levels of people, like, you know, people having dealt with way more. See, not to say anything negative about today's generation. You know, everything has a good and a bad, right? Like everything has a good side, a bad side. Like, yeah, like us, like, in, you know, I guess my generation, we grew up really tough, which is good on one aspect, but obviously bad on the other aspect, right? Like, you don't know how to express yourself, you this and that. So you do go through struggles alone. And if you make it through, it makes you stronger. But see, that's the thing, is if you make it through, right? So obviously you learn to deal things with alone. So it does kind of give you thicker skin, right? Like, in a way. But it's a lonelier road, or how we grew up, like you learn to not express yourself as much in that sense. But I think that's why now I talk more, because I'm like, well, I didn't talk, because I remember when it happened, like I didn't used to talk, and at one point, I think after like 25 something, like whatever, I was just like, you can't shut me up like anymore, because, you know, like aside from writing songs, I wouldn't really express myself. So anyways, for some reason that tape actually it did the trick, and I wish I still had them, because I don't know. See, obviously that's not a popular belief nowadays, for sure. Especially, I think, you know, not to, you know, you could always correct me if I'm wrong, but you know how pharmaceuticals definitely push. I mean, do you see? Maybe you can't even talk about it. So if you can't, then don't say anything, because I don't want to get you in trouble. But my question would be, if you could answer, but like I said, you don't have to. Do you see that? Do you see where it kind of seems like the solution does tend to be like, oh, well, just, you know, take this this pill, take this, take that, like pretty much like even a patient going in just a few sessions, and then, you know, it's kind of taught like, yeah, then you prescribe this, prescribe that. Like, do you see that? Or like I said, you could just plead the fifth. You know,
I think I mean, I think a few things are going on, but I think, you know, I won't really say that they're like they're pushing it, but at the same time, I guess if you're going to go see a psychiatrist, I mean, they're going to talk to you about medication.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of like knowing, hey, if I walk into a Chinese food restaurant, I'm going to get Chinese food. You know, so it's like, know where you're going, kind of. But at the same time, pharmaceuticals in general, they are being pushed in society, you know. So if people are feeling stuff, I think that's their first thought. Let me go get a pill for it.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, and you know, I think I had anxiety for the first time last year or something. Was last year, 2 years ago? I think it was last year in the beginning. But I had an adverse reaction to the pills. So do they teach, like, when people are prescribing that, do they emphasize that, like, hey, you might like this pill? Because I remember I took 3 days, I took the pill, and 2 of those days it made me like borderline suicidal. Like I was in this weird fog, like, but I see, I'm so aware of like myself, right? I'm very self-aware of everything like I'll be feeling. And so I felt, I was like, whoa, these pills got me like feeling pretty messed up. So I stopped taking them. I had to deal with anxiety. I had to like look everything online on how to deal with anxiety in a different way, right? But like that, is it taught like, hey, this might have like, be prepared? Like, is that ever really taught? Like, hey, really be prepared in case it does give you a,
I'm not sure necessarily like in like with the doctors that we have, like I'm not sure how in depth they're talking with their patients about it. I'm sure they're educating, but I think also in general, if somebody's given medication, I mean, it says it on the label, may cause this, side effects include this, right? And we hear it on the commercials too, like, oh, do you want to be happy? Here's this pill and you can go walk miles now, and we see the commercials, and then at the end it talks really fast. Side effects include blah,
yeah.
blah, blah.
And the music's always really pretty at that part.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
like, yeah, it's just when the yeah.
So I guess it's also, again, putting it into people's hands that like you have that decision. You make that decision, and so even if a psychiatrist is offering you something, you still have that decision in whether you say yes to it, or whether you pick it up from the pharmacy, or whether you put it in your mouth. I mean, there's so many steps before somebody's actually taking something.
Oh, okay.
So I do refer patients to see a psychiatrist to get the option, but what I tell them beforehand is it might be good for you to hear the options, but then ultimately you make the decision. So I always let them know ahead of time, you make your decision. Like, I would never tell a patient that they need medication. Sometimes I tell them that it might help them initially, especially if it's like, panic attacks and it's hard to breathe and stuff because of overthinking, that there are medicines that will, like, on the spot, go ahead and calm you. So I'll tell them, if it's that bad and you have to work or you have to get your school done, that medication might be helpful, but I'm not a doctor. So you're gonna have to talk to the doctor about those options, and then you make the decision for yourself,
Yeah. No, and it's funny because, even when I had those pills, when I was dealing with the anxiety, I would carry them with me. And I think psychologically, just having them with me, sometimes I start getting it, I'd get the pill, I'd hold it in my hand, and I'll be like, okay, you could do this, you could don't. And I would fight through it. But see, I'm stubborn. Like I would push myself to that point of like, where you feel like you're about to die, but then all of a sudden, somehow, some way, like, you're able to calm yourself down. But that's just me. But having the pills, for some reason, it would help me, because I don't know, maybe it makes you feel safe. Like, okay, I do have this option. Like, it's with me.
Right.
Like, if worse comes to worse, I know I have that little adverse side effect that I'm gonna have to deal with. Like, if I take it, I know it's gonna make me feel depressed, but at this moment, I might have to take it. So I remember I was going through that, so for a couple months when I was having that, like, I would carry the pills with me. You know what I mean? What else was I gonna tell you? Oh, I wanted to ask you also, because also, like, I don't know if a lot of people are aware of this, but I learned about this unfortunately, like, when my brother passed away, I learned a lot more, like, about suicide and statistics and all that. So do they teach you as a therapist to deal differently with men and women? Like, for example, because men, like, the suicide rate is double. But like, maybe people don't think about it like a lot, like, oh, for every 5 women that kill themselves, 10 men kill themselves. But when you look at the numbers bigger, like, oh, 2,000 for 1,000 women that kill themselves, 2,000 men kill themselves. You know what I mean? So as a therapist, does that ever come up? Is it at all? Because it is a big deal. Like, when I looked at those numbers, I was like mind blown, right? So, so have you ever been taught about that, or do they make it like?
We all go through like our own training. So to keep our license as a therapist, there's I think like 30 hours or something we're supposed to be doing additional studies. And so in those, I mean, we can choose them. And I think one of them is mandatory to do the suicide prevention, or to learn more about it. So we do that. I don't know if I don't think there's anything specific about a difference between working with men and women, but I think in general, there was something, I know there was a class I took, it was good. It was kind of teaching us how to ask differently, so that we're not just like, oh, do you feel suicidal? And people kind of shut down like, no, because they worry about, well, you're going to send me to the hospital, or like, stuff like that. So asking differently, I forgot exactly. I know I have notes on it and I'm sure it comes up every now and then, but just kind of figure out different ways to ask the question. Or if you notice the conversation going in a certain way, asking them more questions geared toward, like, well, what do you think about life, or things like that. And I think too, because as you know, I practice more like on a spiritual background. So I mean, I do ask people like, well, what do you think happens after life? Because I think too, sometimes people are scared to talk about it because, they don't want to look a certain way, or they don't even always know. So like a lot of people that I ask, like, who talk about either death or about suicide, I'll ask them, well, what do you think comes next? Or like, do you think there's anything? They haven't even thought about it. So I think that could give people more power too, if they were to do that research for themselves and come up with their own beliefs about stuff, that maybe they would see things differently.
Yeah, I mean, yes, and I'm not like trying to disagree with you at all, because obviously we all have like, our different ideas. But I mean, I think in those moments, it doesn't matter, right? Like you're so in there that's the last thing that probably goes through your head. Like, where am I gonna go? Like, when you're going through it, when you're in the middle of it,
Right.
I don't think that. I mean, that's what having experienced it myself, right? I didn't want to go too much into the spiritual because I wanted to talk about like so people could relate to it, right?
Right. Yeah.
And obviously hearing that, see, that does bother me that they wouldn't teach that in school, because obviously if the numbers are there and statistics are there, that you see there's this problem that, double the men are killing themselves, and especially now, since gender stuff is such a huge topic, and this and that and that and this, to not teach the fact that, because there is a difference, right? Because the numbers are telling you there's a difference. So this is, like the numbers are telling you there's a difference. So why wouldn't it be, like looked at differently, right? Like, okay, what is it? How do we learn to, pick up on the symptoms that, a male versus a female? Because obviously, like I said, the numbers aren't lying. Like they're showing you that there's this huge problem. So,
well, I think too, sometimes it kind of comes down to, like you said, with gender, women are more likely to open up, like if I'm in a session, when, women are typically the one throwing the bag down, not to be stereotypical, but like throwing the bag down and be like, oh my gosh, girl, let me tell you, it's a whole thing, right? But men typically are the opposite, and it's just through a societal thing that they're just like, yeah, I feel like this every now and then, but what are you going to do about it?
No, and see, do I want to say this? I'll just say it. I mean, it's a spiritual channel anyway. So see, for example, there was one time when for me, everything was going wrong, right? And I remember, like you said, I wasn't telling nobody. I was going through it alone. And I was sitting there at a computer, whatever, I don't know, browsing something. But in my head at that moment, like I decided, I was like, okay, this week when I get paid, I'm gonna go buy the gun, boom, boom. I decided, like, it was, when I decide something, like, it's gonna be done. Like, I'm not gonna tell nobody about it. Nobody's gonna stop me. But at that exact moment, like at that very moment when I made the decision, I heard a loud crash, bam. I was like, what the hell? So I jumped up and, I went like, who the hell is here or what? I went to my hallway, and in the hallway, there was the frame of this thing of like the footsteps, the footsteps, that it's like, wow. It's like a man's walking or I don't know, a man's walking with like Jesus or God or something, right?
Okay.
I think people say it differently. Some say God, some say
Oh,
Jesus.
I think I know what yeah,
Yeah.
I've seen
And then
that.
he's, oh, well, you know, there's, oh, I see these 2 foot, but what about in this path when that was the hardest part of my life? There's only one set of footprints. Where were you there? And then that, you know, Jesus or God, he's like, that's when I was carrying you, you know? So that's when in the hardest part, that's why there's only one set of footprints. So, you know, at the very moment that I decided where it was solid, like I'm gonna do this and nothing was gonna stop me, that frame broke. And it had like this rope. It wasn't even like a little nail or nothing. It was held up with like a nice thick rope, and the rope had snapped, you know? And so, you know, not to get all, but you know, I broke down crying. I was like, shit. And so that kept me around for a little bit longer, you know, like I was like, that. So to me, that was the epitome of divine intervention, right? Because no one was gonna stop me. See, of course, see, not everybody gets that, right? I do give credit to me already having a spiritual walk, me being already, you know, for since I was little or whatever, always having a connection, but even so, even more so having even a stronger connection as I got older and older, right? That they did that for me, like, because I even thought it. I didn't even say it out loud. I didn't say nothing. So that really blew my mind spiritually, right? Like, how is it about like, damn, so they really like could hear everything? Like, how is that even possible, right? That like poof. But it was, you know, and it hit me, it was like, wow, like someone cares, to where it was like, okay, like I'll stick around for a little bit longer, you know?
Yeah.
That's on a spiritual sense. See, so I have my, when I forget, because maybe in the physical sense, you feel like no one cares, right?
Right.
But they had like, still, see, as a human, you need to feel someone cares, right? And
I
so
think too, I think I had mentioned in the previous video we did together that, you know, you can always ask for help, but sometimes like, you know, almost like where if you could think of us like kind of like in the 3D world, there's like a bubble almost like an orb or something. And so things can't really come through to assist us unless we ask for it. But sometimes when we're at that point where we're so low and we feel alone, we don't take that time to ask.
that's, I mean that, see, that's why I had made that point earlier. Me having experienced that, at that point, you think I was gonna stop to ask? Like I didn't stop to say, you know, you know, do this or that, or even that. I'm not in the like. I think everything was just wrong. Probably even finances, everything, just everything. So at that moment, you don't stop to say, hey, well, send me a check for 5 grand or 10 grand or whatever. You know, like
we're still playing 3D games. I need this money.
Yeah, exactly. See, you don't. That's why I'm telling you, like from experience. At least I could say that from experience, like not just you know, like so I know in the thick of it. You know, like it's funny because I've talked to people, you know, that they're on, like, you know, they've been diagnosed, they're on pills, and I've tried to explain to them that I know I've been there, like to that point, like I knew I was gonna do it, that something had to intervene, and they'll even try to minimize it, like if. So I mean, I think that's a problem too. Not just everybody that's you know, like you said, not everybody asks for help. Like there's a lot. I think that's why people end up doing it. Because all those people, I mean, when I was going through all my stuff, I had to know what's going on. And one thing that helped me, I saw at the time, the amount of people that were getting murdered in the US were probably like 7,000 to 8,000, somewhere in there. But the amount of people committing suicide every year was 16,000 something. So double the people were taking their own life than getting murdered. And that blew my mind. So then I felt like, okay, I survived that. So it even made me want to live more, like, damn, like that's crazy. But what makes life so bad that these double the people are taking their own lives than are getting murdered? Now, I mean, the suicide rate is like, I think 45,000 a year or something. Oh, that was in 2020. I haven't seen the statistics for 2022. 2020, it was like 45,000, I think, were killing themselves every year. So jumping up from when I was going through my stuff, 16,000 all the way to 45,000. Obviously, the population has grown and all this and that, but I'm curious to know, like, the murder. I mean, I think murder has gone up too. So maybe they're already, so maybe they're neck and neck. But at least me seeing that, it blew my mind that double the people were taking their own life than were getting murdered. That's insane to me, you know. So I think that made me want to learn more about mental health too, right? Like that sent me too on a journey of why does this happen? You know, I'm almost glad I experienced what I experienced just so I know, like I know what it's like. Sometimes people don't believe you, I guess, because now I'm good. Like if people talk to me, I'm good. I'm very self-aware, and when I do go through things, like I'll figure it out, And so when you talk to people, sometimes maybe they think, well, you're not on pills, you're not this, you're not seeing a therapist, so you must not know.
Yeah,
what
I
it's
think, yeah,
like.
that's the thing too. Me as a therapist, they think that I don't know, but I've experienced suicidal ideation too. I've gone through different things as well. So I don't always explain that to them. Sometimes I'll tell patients a little bit, but not really give them a whole story, just so that they can relate or they feel like I know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, you can come out of that. And I think it's interesting you're talking about suicide, because not too long ago, I actually used to have a lot of stigma around suicide. When I was growing up, I had a family member who would like, threaten to kill themselves. And I always thought it was for attention. I personally thought it was annoying because, it would always take attention off of me. And then I always had to like walk on eggshells because of their thoughts or their behaviors. So me growing up, I also was very quiet or silenced myself because I was going off of how does somebody else feel, or what if I do this and then they do that. So to me, growing up, suicide or even having those thoughts, I thought it was selfish. I thought it was, just for attention. I thought it was stupid. I just, all these things, I just really belittled it. And then I ended up having postpartum depression. So after having children, and I remember learning about it, and I remember I thought that was really wild. I was like, people having babies, like that should be a happy moment. Why are these women experiencing this? And I couldn't get it. I was like, this must be made up. And then I ended up having it twice. So I have 2 kids and I ended up having it back to back. So the first time I didn't have medication for it, I just went through it, and it was wild. I was having crazy thoughts, like, even to the point, when you talk about planning like your death, I was planning on giving my child away. I was like, I'm gonna, let me look up the nearest, it was just like unhealthy stuff. Like there was no reason. I was doing just fine, but I felt like, I guess, inadequate. I was like, I'm not a good enough mom. So like, let me go give my child away. Like it was bad. And then like recognizing those thoughts, I was like, well, now what's wrong with me? Like, so, and I remember I went to a friend and I told her about it, and she was another social worker, and she was like, come here. And I was like, yeah. And she was like, don't tell anybody that. And I was like, why? And she was like, they're going to lock you up. And I was like, okay.
Oh
So,
wow.
so
Should
I
we
didn't
not
tell.
be? Should I edit it out? Should I delete this conversation?
No, this is like in the past now, But so then the second time around, having another child, the thank goodness the doctor asked. So sometimes people don't ask, or they brush by it, but the doctor asked, have you ever experienced postpartum depression? And I told her, because the first time around I was not asked about it, I don't think, or maybe I wasn't. Maybe I didn't think that that's what it was. I don't know. And so the second time around, the person asked, like, and it was completely different doctor. She was like, have you experienced postpartum depression? I was like, thinking about it, I'm pretty sure that's what that was. And she immediately wrote me a prescription. She was like, you're going to take this. And it was just like a low dose. I want to say it was Zoloft or something, like a antidepressant. So I took that for a little bit, and I didn't really, I still had it. I still had the problem, but it was different. It wasn't really towards like my child. It was about myself. So I don't know. So I mean, who knows how it would have been if I hadn't taken medication, or like what would have happened. But I was saying that because, so I had this stigma around it, even though I wanted to be a therapist and go into psychology. It was something I was like, I'm not going to work with those people. And looking at it back on it now, it's silly, because like it is in everybody. I've experienced it. So we can all get to that point. So then I experienced it, and then I went through like a dark time where I was like really beating up on myself because I was like, man, your whole life you were a hypocrite because
Mm.
you were thinking these things about those people or people in general who have the thoughts. Then you experienced it. Like now what? You know? And then I went and worked at a group home where it was like literally everybody was experiencing those thoughts. Everybody didn't want to be there. Nobody wanted to live. So then I was like, great, give them all to me, bring them all here, you know? So I
Wow.
was already like at a low point of like feeling like a hypocrite and then being faced with it. And you know, that I don't know if you believe in the law of attraction, but it was like a mirror. It was like, yeah, this is in you and you've got to deal with it. And here you are. And so I had to work through that. And so now, based on my spiritual journey and everything, I read Dolores Cannon, who I think I had told you about her.
Yes.
She talks about life after death and has all these studies on it. And so there is a theory that people, when they die or when they, I guess, commit suicide, that some of them will come back, you know, that they make this choice to come back. So somebody who overdoses on the pills and then they wake up in the hospital, that
Mm.
in this process, like in the in-between state, their soul made the decision to come back.
Mm.
So now when I see a patient who's had that experience, I almost see it as if like there's an angel or something in my office because it's
Mm.
like you made that decision to come back. And this is just based on what I've read. It's not, you know, nobody needs to believe it, but I resonate with it, and it's helped me kind of totally shift or like alchemize what I once believed to now working with those patients and almost like feeling an honor to work with those patients.
Wow. No, that's beautiful. That's no, I've experienced that because the same when people had anxiety, I would
Mhm.
look at them like it's all in your head or something. I couldn't understand that. That's what I felt. Maybe
Right.
sometimes like I don't know, it's for attention or you just like what
Yeah.
is this? So anxiety used to kind of get on my nerves because I didn't get it right. Um, or I remember I would see people that when I was young. I think that because that was my introduction to people that would take anxiety pills and all that. It was
Yeah.
like people that would do, stuff like drugs, and then they would take their little anxiety pill because the drugs would make us. So I was
Yeah.
like, yeah, I
Yeah.
was like, what the hell? So, but then when I got anxiety last year and the same, I felt like I was gonna die. I was like, wow. So if anything, I'm grateful I experienced it because then I will never look at someone like that again. Like, oh,
Right.
yeah, because
Yeah.
you feel like you're dying pretty much. Like I had to go to the emergency room twice when it started happening because I didn't know what it was. I was like, I
Right.
can't breathe. What is this? Like,
Yeah.
yeah. So, yeah, I'm grateful for the experience. So that at least that So that's why it's funny. I don't know. See, I don't know if it's like how you said law of attraction. To me, I just thought like the universe kind of balances things out, or I don't know how it works.
I think
But
I think ultimately, you know, the things that we go through is we've kind of called them in some way or form. We're not aware of it on a conscious level, but we've called it in. The reason we've called it in is to learn and to evolve. So, but a lot of people don't always get that. And so then you get into kind of like the void or like that dark, and you can get sucked in and stay there. But if you can start having the perspective ahead of time that, hey, I called this in, now let me work with it, then
that's
you
it.
really
That
empower yourself.
Yeah, and that's it. I've never heard someone talk about the void in the physical. See, I'll hear that in the spiritual, but the way you said it right now,
Well, I
that
think
does
that's
make
what
sense.
depression and the suicidal ideation is.
Yeah,
You
being in
know,
stuck.
you're in there. Like I said, those thoughts that I was having, I would never have those thoughts on a regular basis. I even also had, you know, suicidal ideation again this year. I it was around, I want to say it was kind of the way I look at it. I know we're trying to be relatable, but on a spiritual level, I think it was something coming up to like purge. And in that process, I got pulled into that again. And it was like an awful night. It was like, you know, it's almost like the dark night again. But it was
Yeah.
like, I was like, I've already done this. Why am I doing this again? But I just had to like really just let it go. I literally had to walk myself through it, like surrender. And I was having a lot of like physical symptoms and mental. And it got to a point where the physical symptoms were so bad, but I knew it wasn't a medical thing. I wasn't going to go to a doctor, and like there wasn't anything. I just knew internally it was a more spiritual or a psychological mental thing that I just had to get through. But in doing that, I just kind of had to like, I was like, just work through it, just get through it. But it was the same thing. It got to a point where it was so heavy. I was like having the thought of like, just take me. Like, I don't want to be here. If it's going to be like this, I don't want to be here.
That's no, not funny, haha, but that's funny because when I went through the anxiety, like that's kind of how I was feeling, like I wasn't like, oh, I'm gonna do it, but I was just that at that time. See, I was talking to the spiritual. I was talking directly, like every day. I was like, hey, I ain't dealing with this. Like, if you guys you guys better fix me because if I keep going through this, like, I'm not gonna, like, I couldn't leave my house. I'd be driving somewhere, and all of a sudden, do we still have time? I don't know how much time you have.
Yeah, I gotta go in maybe like 5 minutes.
Okay, 5 minutes. Okay, so so I know what that's like. I did want to talk more about the postpartum depression because I've never talked with anyone about that. So I guess in closing, just how, like, I think we wouldn't even have 5 minutes to explain everything about that, huh? Because I don't know, like, so does that happen to everybody? Does it, every woman that gives birth go through that, or how do they, like?
I don't think so. I think I don't know. It's probably different for everybody. I mean, I've talked with other women and some of them haven't had it and some of them have. And I've actually seen patients with it, like so bad, very, very bad, and so for that too, when I said, like, sometimes I'll share things with this one particular woman who came in, it was a very severe case of postpartum depression. I did tell her, I was like, I had it, like, I went through it too. I went through it twice, but I told her she could get through it. And we got her all straightened out and stuff. But I think, I don't know what does it, to be honest, but again, that's why I like to think that it's something that we're calling in. So maybe it isn't for everybody. Or
So you don't think that's more a physiological thing, like?
I definitely think the hormones play a role. I mean, when you have a life inside you and then it leaves, I mean, think about it like that. There is a loss there. Your body is grieving in some way.
That's that
there's
makes
trauma, especially like, so I had a C-section. So I don't know if that changes. I mean, it'd be interesting to study C-section versus natural birth and like the rates of postpartum. But in that, there's a lot of trauma to your body that you're cutting through tissue. So I think there's a book called The Body Keeps the Score. So like maybe not on a mental level, but like on a physical, my body was feeling something, and then it made its way to my mind.
No, thank you. That made a lot of sense, actually. And so just in closing.
Yes.
What would you want to say, like, to anybody that is suffering from depression or having, like, I guess from a more therapist standpoint, like, what's that advice usually you would, give someone that's going through that?
I guess just going off of what we discussed, kind of like summarizing, is that, it's always okay to ask for help. And if you don't feel comfortable enough with the people in your life, reach out, for therapy. There's also, a crisis hotline, the suicide prevention hotline. There's a lot of hotlines with people waiting for those calls, so there's always somebody. Additionally, just understanding that it's temporary. There's no one feeling that's going to last forever. So it's temporary. And also maybe when you're out of it, or when you start to feel better, kind of recognizing or reflecting on what is it bringing up for you? Because I think when you can figure out what was that calling for me, or what am I being asked to do, then you empower yourself. And then maybe if you have to experience it again, you're already prepared to kind of go through it.
Okay. No, thank you. So I would have loved to have, like, keep this going because there's
so we could do a part 2.
Yeah, definitely. We could do a part 2. Yeah, definitely. No, so thank you so much.
Yes,
I know you got to go, so we'll wrap it up right there. And it was an honor having you as a guest again. And I look forward to the next time we do this.
All right. Thank you so much for having me.
No problem. Thank you. Okay. All right.
Bye.
Okay. Bye.
That's right. Yes.
sometimes you're just feeling it, you know what I'm saying? You're just feeling it. Woo! And I want to feel this way forever.